when I try to give somebody an intellectual solution, why don't you just leave this relationship? It sounds like it's very abusive to you, but they don't do it. And then they keep on ruminating about it, keep talking about it, talking about it. That tells me there's unresolved trauma in there. And no amount of intellectual talking is going to resolve it because you've already tried. Um, the main work that I do is I work with families dealing with addiction in their homes. When I say addiction, I mean really bad addiction, not just, I mean, once in a while it is smoking pot or even gaming while smoking pot, but lots of times it can be multiple addictions, alcohol, cocaine, fentanyl, even sometimes all of this stuff together. And then when I talk to their loved ones, when I talk to the parents of the people with the addiction issue, they also say that they have multiple mental health issues, traumas. They've been, they've had, they were diagnosed ADHD as a child, and they possibly think they're autistic, and they've definitely been through trauma. So we're talking about some strong emotional dysregulation, multiple mental health, multiple addiction issues. Lots of times there's homelessness, um, unable to keep a job or living in the parents' basement or something like that. And so we're talking about some deep relationship issues. And the reason that they come to me, they work with me is because they're having problems communicating in a relationship like this, as you can imagine. The parent is so pulling their hair out over the possible, like, my child could die over this, and they're having a really hard time communicating with their loved one in a peaceful way, understandably. And so they come to me and I help them to communicate more peacefully. And one of the things that I say is what I'll say to you right now. When you think about that problem, you think about, you know, that problem that you're having, usually there's a strong anxiety, a fear, a frustration, a terror, or rage attached to it. Usually it's like anger or fear is one of the main emotions that comes up with it, right? And what I tell parents is you're feeling that because you're scared of the worst case scenario. That's what the mind is scared of. It's scared of, and considering that it's addiction, they're scared of their child dying, right? That's pretty much what it is. They live with this terrible fear that their child is going to die at any moment because of this addiction. Maybe they have overdosed several times. But what I tell the parents is this, honestly, I say, your mind is actually not scared of the event. So, and I'll say that to you, whatever this issue is, your mind is actually not scared of the event, even someone dying. I say this straight to parents in which they're scared their child is going to die of their drug addiction and overdose because they've already possibly overdosed several times. What I tell them is your mind is scared of how that event is going to make you feel. That's really what it is. This sense of intense, possibly feeling like it's unending grief, guilt, responsibility, uh, failure as a parent, loss, the end of the family that you knew it, and just feeling in this kind of grief. It's really about the feelings that I say. And that's what makes it so difficult. When you're so scared about feeling a really difficult feeling like that, your mind will go into a panic or anxiety mode and try not and do everything it can to not feel that. Like people pleasing, always putting yourself last because you don't want to deal with people's criticism of you because you have your own self-loathing in there. Um, Enabling, you know, giving in because again, maybe you're scared of the outcome if you don't give in, that the person may, well, for the parents, they're scared that the child may like run away or die or something like that. And so they just sort of give in and enable and stuff. And so again, it's not the event that the mind is scared of. It's how the event will make you feel. That's why I started out this whole thing saying, bring up a topic, a problem that you're having. Think of any kind of problem that you're having to the point where you feel the feeling of it. And like I said, it's usually an anxiety, a dread, a frustration, even a rage, even a terror. But imagine that when you think about this topic, you felt nothing but this imperturbable, deep, profound peace and this sense of everything's going to work out the way it needs to. Everything's going to be okay. And I'm not saying that you're pushing the feeling down. And I'm not saying that you're giving in. I'm not saying that you're ignoring the problem. I'm saying that your feeling of anxiety or anger is replaced with peace. And I'll be honest, what I also tell the parents is this is why your loved one does drugs, because they have the same problem and they don't want to feel that feeling. They want to feel peace. And the only way they know how to do it is to drink or smoke pot or do something like that. That's why they're having the addiction issue. And so that is that is the solution, the main simple solution to a lot of what human problems are, is all around the feelings of it. And what I tell people though is like, well, if I don't feel the feeling, then I'm not going to get anything, I'm not going to solve the problem. If I just feel this peace over it, I'm just going to let my son die. If I feel this peace over him using drugs or something, no, I tell them no. You'll still tackle the problem. You'll still, be pragmatic about it and try to solve the problem. You're just not going to do it from this overly emotional place where your emotions are out of control and controlling your thoughts and your actions. Because think about like how many really good decisions have you made when you've had a problem, when you've made it and you're overly anxious, scared, angry, frustrated, or in terror? And how often have you actually made a really good solution-oriented decision in that space? I would say less than 50%. For me, definitely less than 50%, because your brain doesn't even give you the full range of options that it's able to think about. Because when you're in terror or anger, it's only thinking about one thing: eliminate the trigger, get rid of this problem. And so it's going to like try to get rid of the problem with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Thus, you make, you overreact to decisions. And if you're neurodivergent like me, you'll really make an overreacted decision. So it's not that you won't solve the problem, it's just that you're going to do it from a calmer place in your heart. And so the parents are like, and that's what they find. When they do this work, they resolve the emotions underneath, they are able to talk to their loved one in a calmer way. And the great thing is, they no longer get into fights with them and arguments with them as much because they're no longer coming at their kid with this sense of like trying to control them and stuff. So this is not exactly what I wanted to talk about today, but it was trying to make the point of the way we resolve issues here in this coaching program, in this channel, is quite simple. It's all about the emotions. And the way we resolve the emotions is not intellectual. It's not therapy. It's not affirmations. You are not thinking your way to peace with this, the way we do it. It's all simply somatic energy release. That's the closest thing that people may have heard of. It's not a very popular thing. It's not a very popular, well-known way to solve problems by simply resolving the emotions underneath first. Okay. And when I say somatic energy release, all it is feeling them. There are some people on here right now who have done this work before. And you can, if you want, please share. If you've gone through this protocol with me, you know that I actually tell you, don't think too much. Like, put your mind to the side. When I work with you individually, I will make sure that you're not in your head too much. And I will tell you, just feel the feeling. And I'm sitting there with you, helping you to be present-minded and in this state of meditative peace while you're bringing the feeling up. It has nothing to do with your head. It has nothing to do with your mind trying to solve a problem, to try to get to a better solution so you feel better. That's a temporary solution when you do it that way. When you resolve it somatically, simply when I say somatically, just feel it and experience it in the body. People report a kind of peace over their problem that they've never had before, including here. And they say it's quite miraculous because then when the same problem arises, they're just not feeling the same way because they resolve that fear somatically, not intellectually. Okay, so that's how we resolve problems here. But yes, been a very positive impact so far. It's really worked for me. Thank you very much. For those of you, yeah, who have tried this before, if you want to comment on what it was like for you, for those of you who maybe have questions about this, what I wanted to actually talk about before I do the meditation, and I have like maybe around a half hour to do it, is I wanted to talk about, I guess what you would it would be considered a difficult, complicated topic that has many different definitions and points of view. I wanted to talk about the ego or the person. So this is a word it's trying to do, but you have to repress trauma. You are your biggest investment. Yes, thank you. Yes, it can be if you're holding back. So based on what you might have heard me just say right now, and you might be saying, well, I don't want to go into a trauma like that. And I know I have feelings in there that I haven't looked at, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to look at this stuff. I don't want to have to feel that. And I made a video about this. You are feeling it already. You're feeling it maybe with a low grade depression or not, maybe not even a low grade depression. You're feeling it through a depression that seeps out of you. You're feeling it through your anxious behaviors. You're experiencing this emotion through dealing with addictions, distractions, anything where you're, doing a lot of a behavior that you'd rather not be doing, like stress eating, vaping, um, spending way too much time on Netflix to the point where you're not getting anything done. These could all be signs that there's an emotion in there that you're suppressing and it's coming out sideways. Or it can come out in a way in which you're snapping at your loved ones or you're not communicating with your loved ones. It's affecting your life already, is what I'm saying. I know that you're trying to be functional, and that therefore you don't want to have to feel it, but it's affecting your life already. And so what this work does is like, let's just deal with it head on through this somatic protocol. It can be exhausting when you go through it, but then people report after the session for months later, like they're at more peace. I was just talking to a mother I did this protocol with, and she wanted to tell her daughter about it because she said, you did this protocol with me around 3 months ago. And I wanted to tell her, just you don't realize the long-lasting effects of the peace that you get from doing this work in your life because it just almost like it continues to like spread this peace throughout your consciousness and it just continues to resolve all these difficult anxiety-based issues in your life over time. And so she wanted to tell her daughter, like, it's amazing because you do this like a few times, then months later, you're like experiencing the peaceful changes in your consciousness and in your thoughts. Just this more acceptance and peace grows and grows and grows. I'm like, yeah, that's the way this works because you resolve the emotions around it. So I wanted to talk about the ego and the person and what that is, and mainly saying that the ego is that which holds on to all these unresolved emotions. And so, okay, so the ego is does come out in the form of your emotional thinking. Let's just say it that way. First of all, I want to say I'm going to talk about the ego and the person, and here at Light Minds, we have a very specific definition of what the ego is. So it's not Freudian. You might have ideas from reading your own psychology books, from doing your own research, what the ego is. We have our own definition of what the ego is. Okay. So the ego is your emotional based thinking, or more simply put, whenever you think about yourself, your story, your needs, your wants, your concerns, your desires, and you start to feel a strong emotion that you can tell, like you're really attached to the outcome. I really need this person to like me. I really need to get this job. I really need to save this money. And you can feel this almost this kind of like anxiety about being attached to the outcome in your story because I really need this because, I want to get this job or I really need this to pay my rent. You're talking about yourself in your head and you're concerned about something and you're really trying to make this outcome happen and you're really feeling the emotions behind it, that's your ego. Okay. So when I said your ego is emotion-based thought, it's not any kind of thought. You can have thoughts about your grocery list. You can have thoughts about um, maybe just thinking about how many CDs you have in your CD collection or something like that. Something very mundane. You can be thinking about, when is the football game on this Sunday? Those are functional based thoughts. If you start to have a thought of like, well, I really am nervous about the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Detroit Lions, and I really need them to win because I really love my team. And whenever they lose, I get so depressed. That's the ego. And so a function-based thought is, what time is the game? It's on Sunday on NBC. But an ego-based thought is, my goodness, I hope they win because I really feel bad when they lose. And, I just really need them to have a good record. It feels so good when they win. So now you're attached to the outcome. There's a thought, I really want them to win, and there's an emotion there. That's the ego. That's what the ego is. Okay, so it's this emotional attachment to your story inside your head. And usually the two main actions that the ego is doing is it's either wanting something, it's trying to grab something to itself, like I really want my team to win. I really need that money. I really need this job to work out. I really need this person to like me. So it's trying to grab something to itself, or it's trying to push something away and reject something. I really don't want them to lose. I really need to stay away from this person. I really hate this job. I really need to move away from here. This is not a good place for me to live. So it's either pulling something toward itself or it's rejecting something. And so your ego is that part of your mind which is attached to your survival mechanism of your brain. The ego is is created from the brain, and the brain is the onboard computer of the body, and the brain's job is to help the body to survive and thrive, right? And so the ego, the thinking of the ego is from the brain. It's a product of the brain. So the ego is doing the same thing. Its job is the same job as the brain. It's trying to help you survive and thrive, survive and thrive. So it's going to help you to grab things that will help it to survive and thrive, or push things away that it feels will threaten its survival, or make the body live a bad life, a terrible life, unhappy life. And so it's pushing stuff away that it feels is either a threat or will make the body unhappy, and it's pulling to itself things that will help it to survive or feel good or thrive. That's what the ego is. And you may have heard from other kinds of books or other speakers that the ego is bad, that the problem is we have this ego and the ego is always causing a problem. I am not of that ilk. That's not what we teach here. There are other spiritual teachers, psychology teachers, coaches who say that the ego is bad because it always gets you into mischief. I don't see it that way. No, I mean, I see actually the ego as a necessary part of this body's survival mechanism. You know, like I said, your brain is that part of the body that is designed to help the body survive and thrive, and it creates this ego or this personality that's goal is to survive and thrive. So it's just a natural part of the body, right? So where's the difficulty then? The difficulty can come out because another thing that the ego does is it holds on to trauma. So I once heard from a spiritual teacher that she really felt that when you really have a strong sense of a needy ego, a needy person, a strong victimized person, a person that is always very, very emotional, um, is always feeling attacked, is always criticizing and judgmental and negative, or is addicted and always trying to grab things and do a smash and grab job and just try to grab what it wants and all. That's because it has a lot of unresolved trauma. Okay. And so the difficulty comes out when the ego has too much unresolved trauma in the body that is affecting it. It makes it the only term I can think of is it bloats the ego. It makes it balloon up and makes it become much more emotionally intense and strong than what it needs to be. Okay. And so if you're going to say that there's a problem, the problem is the unresolved emotions in there and the trauma. So what is the trauma? Trauma is simply a difficult, challenging emotion that was really, really strong. And there's like only like four or five of these emotions, but the body starts to feel it, and then it doesn't complete the cycle of the feeling, and then it gets stuck in the body, like fear or terror, um, hopeless despair, um, self-loathing, self-hatred, um, pain of victimization. These are all feelings that are so, so intense sometimes when they're felt intensely like that. The mind gets scared and shuts the feeling down so it can keep moving. But because it didn't complete the cycle, it actually gets physically stuck in the body and stays there. And so I've learned to see this now as a coach when I work with people and they go into a strong complaining victim story, and and usually the victim story does involve getting victimized, meaning somebody or something made them suffer a lot. Could be your parents from childhood, it could be a partner, it could be a boss, something abusive to you, right? But you never really allowed yourself to complete the cycle of feeling the pain or feeling the fear or feeling the self-loathing, and it just gets stuck there. And you can tell when you have an egoic person with a lot of trauma weight, bloated emotions, ballooning this ego to a size that's just really emotionally intense because the person keeps on complaining about the same issue over and over and over and over again. Even when you give them a solution like, well, why don't you leave this relationship? Or why don't you leave that job? You know, you give them an intellectual solution, but the person keeps on saying something like, well, what am I going to do? Every job is the same. That's what I used to say when I hated my job. And my then wife would say, why don't you just get another job? There's other treatment centers around here. There's other places you can get a job in your field. No, all jobs are the same. And then I just go right back to complaining about it again. So when I try to give somebody an intellectual solution, why don't you just leave this relationship? It sounds like it's very abusive to you, but they don't do it. And then they keep on ruminating about it and keep talking about it, talking about it. That tells me there's unresolved trauma in there. And no amount of intellectual talking is going to resolve it because you've already tried, right? How many times have you given advice to somebody and even they might even say, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I should leave the person. You're right. And the next week, the next month, the next year, even the same old stuff. And it does get to the point where you like roll your eyes hearing this stuff. How many of you have friends, partners that are like this? You know, that's because now I've learned to see, that person's not choosing to be this way. They're not choosing to not listen to you in your advice. They're stuck in a trauma loop. They're stuck in what I call a thought cycle loop. They're stuck in like a thought loop of trauma in which the emotion is just stuck in there and has discombobulated the system, sort of like short-circuited the computer, and the mind is just stuck on a loop over it. I once met a guy that told me my boss destroyed my life. He just totally destroyed my life, and I have no life anymore. And I thought this just happened. When I asked him, how long ago did this happen? 15 years ago. 15 years ago. And I looked at him. He looked like he had his health. It wasn't like he was missing a limb because got into a terrible accident caused by his boss or something like that. He was, he had all of his limbs, he had his faculties, he had every part of his functioning body there, but he was stuck in a loop. He was stuck in a loop of unresolved emotion, grief, shock, loss, whatever it was. and it was stuck that way. And have you ever met somebody like this? I do. I've met people in which when they tell you like my life ended when my fiance died, and you ask them how long ago they died, and they'll say sometimes 15 years ago or 20 years ago. Like they'd never resolve the emotion in there. And that carrying that emotion around like that, these kinds of trauma-based self-loathing, fear, hopeless despair, you could see it in their face. You could see it the way they talk about this issue. They're not light, they're not happy about it. Sometimes it weighs them down. Lots of times, honestly, they're dragged to be around because if you get them talking on that topic, you know what they're going to say and you don't want to hear it anymore, you know? And again, that tells me that's an ego or a computer that's bogged down with trauma, right? And from my experience with this, from my own experience with trauma, talking might be able to get it done, like therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, stuff like that, but it takes too long. It could take years to undo a thought that's being fueled by unresolved trauma. Years to undo that. People might say, well, meditation or yoga, yes, that can work, but that can also take years as well because, you're basically just doing your best to sit there in peace. And lots of times people, you know, all they want to do is feel peace and they don't want to deal with the emotion. And so lots of times meditation doesn't resolve the problem and it still gets stuck there for years, like me. I used to think the purpose of meditation was just to feel peace, and that's it. And I can use it to push my emotions down. And I did for years and years and years until somebody told me that's not the point. You know, peace is just an emotion. You don't use the peace in your body to push all the other emotions down. You know, life is meant to feel everything. You're supposed to feel all this stuff. You can't hide in this peace that you're feeling all the time. So sometimes meditation and yoga can take too long. So what did we find that can resolve this quickly, effectively, and lastingly? Meaning it only takes, honestly, sometimes as short as a few hours, as long as, say, a couple months of like one session a week for like 90 to 120 minutes, hour and a half to 2 hours. Um, so it can be as short as that, doing this somatic release work. It's effective in that it really just brings the emotion up and completes the cycle in the body. I know when I work with people that it's completing the cycle in the body because their body looks different. Their face looks different when they go through this work. When they start talking about the issue about their son or their job or whoever, their mother, they come in, their faces are tight, like, they're like rock, they're like stone, their brow is furrowed and stuff. And then when they release the emotion through the protocol that we do, they end up looking like they've been to Woodstock like this. And they're like, yeah, I just don't see that there's a problem. I feel a lot better. I'll be honest, they sort of look like they're high because, they resolved the trauma. And so they're at total peace and they're totally relaxed and they look like, they're like high or something. So they just look, their faces are relaxed, their eyes look bigger because they're not wincing anymore. That's when I know they've had an emotional release there. So it's effective. And then the last thing is it's lasting. And I said this many times. The first person I ever did this with was 6 years ago. And I became friends with that person. To this day, she says, I still feel that peace, that shift that occurred when I first worked with you. It never went away. Like it never went away. I feel it still, and it's still in me. This sense of peace, less anxiety, more able to roll with the punches, more, so when you do this work, it's immediate, effective, and lasting. And what it ends up creating, to really simply put, what it ends up creating is just a softer person, just a softer personality. That's what it ends up creating. Like there's been this term that I have used called an ego death, right? And that's a term that you hear a lot in spiritual awakening circles and psychology circles. And probably like the ego, it has different definitions of what an ego death is. And so to me, an ego death is when you resolve all the emotions that were all stuck in the body, that was creating all these trauma-based thought loops around different topics like your boss, your mother, your wife, whatever it is. It's just creating these victim-based thought trauma loops and stuff. We take the emotions out of that. We just resolve the trauma emotions around it, right? And basically, the person doesn't talk that way anymore. They don't think that way anymore because what was fueling all of those thoughts and those things that they would say, those cyclical loops, was the emotion that was trapped in the body, the trauma. We resolved it. And so they just don't have those thoughts as much. They don't talk like that when they're talking to their wife or talking about their boss anymore. I used to be stuck in one of these victim trauma-based thought loops around my childhood to the point where when you heard me talk about it, it was as if the trauma of my childhood happened yesterday. Why? Because it was stuck. It was never allowed to complete the cycle. When I finally went through this somatic release process, I don't even think about the childhood trauma and abuse anymore. Or if I do, there is no sense of anger anymore. There's no sense of feeling victimized anymore. There's no sense of feeling life is unfair and it did this to me. And I'm telling you, it's not because I pushed it down. It's not because I just said, just stop complaining and stop your whining and stop being like a victim and just think different thoughts. Damn it. It's not because of that. It's because all of those victim-based thoughts from my childhood were fueled by the emotions that were never allowed to process fully, and then I process them so the thoughts don't come back. And so that's what it's like. You're still, so to me, an ego death is you're still the same you. You're just not full of all this unresolved trauma anymore. You're just not full of all this victim energy. You're just not full of all this unresolved fear, unresolved self-loathing, unresolved um, despair over some kind of thing that happened to you in the past, and so it's just you, but softer, you less hard-edged, you able to roll with the punches, able to take life on life's terms. This another term for this has been called having a spiritual awakening, and that's a different way to put it. But when you have this ego death, and when people ask, like, well, what is in your consciousness a lot then? If you're not feeling all that trauma-based emotion, that victim energy, you're feeling the peace of God, if you want to put it that way. You're feeling this deep, profound, imperturbable peace, almost like this peaceful presence in your consciousness. And even when you're feeling emotions, you can always feel it in the background there. So I should also say this, it's not that we get rid of your emotions. You will still get emotional. So it doesn't stop life from having its ups and downs, and it doesn't stop your body's emotional system from working. It doesn't do that. All we're doing is resolving the unresolved traumas back there from your past or from generational trauma. That's the trauma of your parents, your grandparents, your ancestors. It resolves that. And so you still have emotions, but you're just not bloated and weighed down and ballooned up with these unresolved emotions in there. And I should say that traumas may still happen to you in your life. Because again, like, ups and downs, the roller coaster, stuff like that, loved ones dying, financial loss, breakups of relationships. This stuff will still happen to you. The difference is once you learn how to do this and feel the feelings and resolve it and stuff, those things don't become new traumas that then get piled on to the old traumas. You know how to resolve it. Yes, it's sad when somebody breaks up with you. Yes, it's frustrating when you've had financial loss or like fearful when you've had financial loss. The difference is you can keep it from being a trauma. You can keep it from getting trapped in the body because now I just have to, relax the body, access the meditative piece, and feel the feeling. And so, sometimes people do tell me like, well, yeah, I still have the ups and downs. What's that? What is that all about? Well, you will still have ups and downs. I mean, your body's, it's like when people feel emotions, they say, why am I feeling, what was that all about? Why am I feeling these emotions? And then when I talk about resolving the emotions, then they say, well, I don't want to not have emotions. You're trying to make me into a zombie. You'll still feel your emotions. They just won't as much turn into traumas, which means it won't get stuck in the body, So that's what it's like. And I call that an ego death, basically, because those kinds of old trauma-based, victim-based thoughts just don't plague you as much. You don't feel, therefore you don't react the same way under certain kinds of triggers that you used to with your mother, with your boss, with any kind of thing that used to cause you a problem because it was shaped by trauma in there. So and people have said, like, my husband said, like, you're a different person. You're acting differently. Yeah, you look more peaceful. You look more able to roll with the punches. You're able to be at more peace over things that didn't give you, that were triggering to you, possibly. Okay, so that's what the ego is. Um, and so if you ever notice somebody, I mean, I invite you to do this week as a little experiment for yourself. Maybe you could see it in yourself, but it's easier to see it in another person. You know, when you see somebody that friend, a relative, your mother, girlfriend, um, a boss or something like that, and just complaining about the same thing over and over again, even though you've given them the solution to the problem, learn to see that as honestly an unresolved, stuck feeling in them, a trauma, basically, a difficult, unresolved, stuck feeling that was intense, and it gets stuck in the body. It's a trauma. That's what's happening. That mind is on like a trauma loop, is what's happening. It's on a trauma loop. And those trauma loops can last not just years, it can last for decades. I was thinking that way about my childhood and my past and my abuse for decades. I was thinking that because I didn't know how to resolve and release the trauma until somebody showed me how to do that. Okay, so just notice that. It's like they're not complaining to you incessantly, not resolving their problem on purpose. Who wants to be like that? Nobody's doing that on purpose. They're doing it because they don't know what to do with the emotion. And I should say that this work is not very known, it's not very popular. We're really taught in our society to prize our intellects and our minds. And if you're neurodivergent, you do that a lot more than usual because you're so emotionally intense. And so what I'm saying is, if you notice somebody like that, I wouldn't necessarily tell them, dude, you're stuck in a trauma loop. There's this thing that you can do called somatic release. Look at this meditation. They'd probably look at you like, what? What is that all about? It's all about feeling your feelings, man. They're not going to get it. I mean, I didn't get it when somebody told me, you're sort of skeptical. So I wouldn't necessarily tell them that, unless they're really, really, really suffering and, they're just desperate for an answer, like, okay, there's possibly something that can help you here, you know. Um, so yeah, I was just saying this as an experiment, just to notice that when people talk like that, you know, this is like a physical organic vehicle. This is the onboard computer. A trauma got stuck in there. Like, you could say like an electrical surge went through there and got stuck. It didn't get to go through all the way in the body and it got stuck there. And so now on that particular topic about their boss, about their wife, about their brother, whoever it is, it's the mind is just stuck in this loop and stuff. It's trying to vent a little bit, but it's not, venting like that just takes too long. So that's just learn to see people like that because again, it's they're not doing it on purpose. They're trapped by not knowing how to resolve their trauma. So that's why at the end of every talk, and I'm going to go into it now, at the end of every talk, I do a somatic release meditation. Okay, so I'm going to do that now, and does anybody have any questions or comments about what I just said? I'm pretty sure there's going to be this question like, what the hell are you talking about, man? What do you think the difference between feeling and observing the feeling is? Ooh, that's a good question. I'd say if you're feeling it and experiencing it in the body, even if you're observing it, the feeling, but you know that you're feeling it, there isn't a difference. That's what I'd say. If and feeling, experiencing should resolve the issue. It should resolve it. So even if you're observing your body feeling, it should resolve the feeling. The person should feel more peace over that topic. So that I'd say they're the same thing. That's a good question. So a really good example is I taught this protocol to my daughter, and she just had an issue with her guy that she was, I was going to say boyfriend, guy that she's dating. They're not dating anymore and stuff. But this is the first time she ever went through something like this, like something in college, pretty serious thing, didn't work out. She calls me up. I taught her this protocol a couple times. And so when she called me up, first thing she did, I knew what she was going to talk to me about. She didn't even bother to say anything. She just started crying straight out. And knowing about this, and being her father and caring and stuff like that, I let her cry. Like I knew what, she told me what was happening, that it was not doing well and stuff. So she cried and she just, and then she'd get up, she'd look at me again, and then she'd talk a little bit more, then she'd cry again like that. And I could tell that she wasn't getting stuck in a loop. Like if she started to talk about, I'm gonna go stalk him, or I'm gonna go find that girl that he's going out with right now, I'm not gonna like grab her hair. Or if she's starting to like talk in some kind of erratic way, that she's like trying to not feel sad, she's not trying to not feel the grief of like losing this relationship, then I would have been like, okay, you're losing it, like let's just go back to our feelings here. But she wasn't doing that. I could see that she was actually just feeling the feeling. She was allowing, I was allowing it. I was just sitting, I wasn't even saying anything. I was just, yes, honey, this is really, it is tough when you first go through this with the boy, and it's really tough, and you really like the person, and you thought that, this could have worked out. It's really, I acknowledged her feelings over it, and she cried and she cried. She did that, honestly, like for 2 or 3 days. I'll be honest with you. She did that for like 2 or 3 days. But just today, she's walking and she's telling me how much of a wonderful person she is. And she's saying that, that she feels really good about herself. She really knows that she's a good person, and she really knows that she has a lot to offer. And I was like, great. And I'll be honest, I mean, she might have gotten there without processing the emotion. I'm just of the belief that she got there faster. You know, I mean, it took her a few days to process this. She didn't go into a weird story in her head and started saying like how everybody hates her or men are all just terrible people or something. She just processed the emotion, and now it's like she just left it behind. And that's what happens when you can feel the emotions like that. Okay, so